The wind cut to the frozen ridgeline, like a blade forged from pure hatred. Corporal Elena Voss pressed her eye against the Schmidt and Bender 5-25x56 scope mounted on her Macmillan TAC 50, watching 14 soldiers walk directly into a kill zone they couldn't see. Her breath came in short, controlled bursts, each exhale crystallizing into tiny ice particles that drifted past her cheekbone. The temperature had dropped to -18 overnight, and her thermal imaging scope painted the enemy positions in ghostly whites and grays against the frozen landscape. 2 PKM machine gun emplacements, 7 infantry, ridge position at 760 meters. Perfect overlapping fields of fire covering the only crossing point for 3 kilometers in either direction. 3rd Platoon had no idea they were about to die. Elena's radio crackled with static, the same message that had been repeating for the past 4 hours. All units withdraw to Rally Point Kilo. Immediate extraction. No exceptions. Command had made the calculation that losing stragglers was acceptable. Command had decided that 14 soldiers weren't worth the risk of delaying the convoy. Command was sitting in a heated TOC 40 kilometers behind the front, looking at blue icons on a digital map, while real men and women froze to death in valleys they'd never seen. Elena had received the order. She understood the order. And in the next 30 seconds, she was going to disobey that order in a way that would end her career, her pension, and possibly her life. Her finger found the trigger guard. Not yet. Not until 3rd Platoon crossed the tree line and entered the final approach. The enemy gunners were disciplined. They wouldn't open fire until the kill zone was fully occupied. That gave her a window. A tiny, frozen window measured in heartbeats and bullet trajectories. She thought about her daughter, 6 years old. Brown eyes that reminded Elena of her father, the late Staff Sergeant Marcus Voss, who had died in Kinner Province when Elena was 19. She thought about the promise she'd made to herself when she held that baby for the first time. She would come home. She would always come home. But she also thought about 14 families who would receive folded flags if she did nothing in the next 5 minutes. The math was impossible. The distance was extreme. The cold had turned her rifle's action sluggish, and her fingers numbed despite the heated gloves. She had 17 rounds of .50 BMG ammunition, 9 targets, 2 machine gun positions, 1 sniper against a prepared ambush in sub-zero conditions at 3/4 of a kilometer. No one would ever know if she simply followed orders. No one would ever blame her. The official report would note that 3rd Platoon was lost during withdrawal due to communication failure and enemy action. Elena Voss would receive her commendation for successful extraction. She would go home to her daughter. She would keep her promise. Below, the first soldiers of 3rd Platoon emerged from the tree line, their winter camouflage making them nearly invisible against the snow-covered terrain. They moved in a tactical column, weapons up, scanning for threats they couldn't possibly see. The ridge position was hidden behind a natural rock formation, invisible from their approach angle. The enemy had chosen this ambush site with professional precision. Whoever commanded that machine gun team knew exactly what they were doing. If that opening hooked you, trust me, this story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more incredible stories of courage under impossible circumstances, and hit that notification bell. Now, let me take you back to where Elena's path to this frozen ridge began. 27 hours earlier, Elena had been assigned to provide overwatch for the battalion's systematic withdrawal from Firebase Vostok. The operation had been planned for weeks, a carefully coordinated retrograde movement designed to consolidate defensive positions before the winter storms made the mountain passes impassable. Intelligence had indicated light enemy presence in the AO, nothing more than scattered patrols and observation posts. The withdrawal should have been routine. It wasn't. Elena remembered standing in the operations center as the first reports came in. Enemy forces had infiltrated the withdrawal corridor. Multiple ambush positions identified. 2 supply convoys already hit. The carefully planned withdrawal had become a fighting retreat, and the neat timetable had collapsed into chaos within the first 6 hours. She had been assigned to Sergeant First Class Derek Holloway's sniper team, operating from Opie Ridgeback, a camouflage observation post overlooking the primary withdrawal route. Holloway was a 20-year veteran with 2 silver stars and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains around them. He'd trained Elena personally, taking her from a promising marksman to one of the most capable long-range shooters in the battalion. He didn't give compliments. He gave corrections. But the absence of corrections was its own form of praise, and Elena hadn't received a correction in over 4 months. The withdrawal from Firebase Vostok had begun at 0400 on the first day. Elena and Holloway had watched through their scopes as the convoy rolled past their position, armored vehicles grinding through the fresh snow, soldiers huddled in the cargo beds with their weapons pointed outward. Everything had proceeded according to plan for the first 12 hours. Then the blizzard hit. Visibility dropped to less than 50 meters. The convoy halted. Radio communications became sporadic as the storm interfered with satellite uplinks. And somewhere in that chaos, 3rd Platoon had been separated from the main body. Elena learned about it through fragments of radio traffic that cut through the static. 3rd Platoon had been assigned to rear security, covering the final elements of the withdrawal. When the blizzard hit, they had been ordered to hold position until the storm passed. But the storm hadn't passed. It had intensified. And somewhere in those howling hours, contact with 3rd Platoon had been lost entirely. Sergeant First Class Holloway had made the decision to investigate. He was that kind of soldier, the type who couldn't leave people behind, even when the tactical situation demanded it. Elena had watched him argue with Captain Morrison over the tactical radio, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Sir, we have 14 personnel unaccounted for. Last known position was Checkpoint Bravo, 2 clicks southeast of our current POS. I can take Voss and conduct a reconnaissance. We'll link up with the convoy at Rally Point Kilo." Captain Morrison's response had been immediate and unequivocal. "Negative, Sergeant. You will withdraw with your team to the rally point. That is a direct order. We cannot risk additional assets searching for a platoon that may already be combat ineffective. The extraction window is closing. You have your orders." Holloway had stared at the radio for a long moment, his jaw working silently. Then he had looked at Elena with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was resignation. "You heard the captain," Holloway said quietly. "Pack your gear. We're moving out in 30 minutes. Elena had wanted to argue. She had wanted to tell him that they couldn't abandon 14 soldiers based on a commander's calculation of acceptable losses. But she had seen the look in Holloway's eyes, and she understood something that experience had taught her. Sometimes the people giving orders are wrong, and sometimes you follow those orders anyway because the alternative is chaos. They had packed their equipment in silence. Elena broke down her TAC-50, securing it in the drag bag designed for extended movement over rough terrain. She checked her ammunition, 17 rounds of match-grade .50 BMG, each one hand-loaded for maximum accuracy at extreme range. She verified her thermal optics, her backup iron sights, her communication equipment, her first aid kit, her survival gear, everything a sniper needed to operate independently for up to 72 hours in hostile territory. Holloway had watched her preparations with an unreadable expression. "You're thorough," he said finally. "Good. Always be thorough. It's the shortcuts that kill you out here. Sergeant, those people." "I know." His voice cut her off, not unkindly but firmly. "I know exactly who those people are. I've served with some of them for years. But we have our orders, and orders exist for a reason. The captain sees the bigger picture. He knows things we don't. We have to trust the chain of command. Do you trust it?" Elena asked. It was a dangerous question. The kind of question that could end a career if asked to the wrong person. Holloway met her eyes. "I trust that the captain believes he's making the right decision. Whether he's actually right is something we'll never know. That's the burden of command, Corporal. Making decisions that might be wrong and living with the consequences." They had moved out at 0530, leaving Opie Ridgeback behind and beginning the long trek toward Rally Point Kilo. The storm had subsided to occasional snow flurries, and visibility had improved enough to navigate by terrain features. Elena had taken point, her rifle secured across her back, her eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines for any sign of enemy activity. The first indication that something was wrong came at 0730. Elena had been crossing a frozen stream bed when she noticed tracks in the snow. Not American boots. The tread pattern was wrong. These were the distinctive prints of Vostok combat boots, Standard issue for enemy infantry forces. And they were fresh, no more than 6 hours old, based on the minimal snow accumulation in the impressions. She had signaled Holloway, who moved up to examine the tracks. His expression had darkened as he studied the evidence. Platoon-size element, he said quietly, moving northeast, toward the withdrawal corridor, toward checkpoint Bravo. Elena added. Holloway nodded slowly. They're setting up an ambush. They know our withdrawal route, and they're positioned to intercept anyone coming through that sector. 3rd Platoon. The words hung in the frozen air between them. Holloway closed his eyes for a moment, and Elena could see the conflict playing across his weathered features. Orders versus duty. Protocol versus conscience. The same impossible equation that every soldier faced at some point in their career. We report this to command, Holloway said finally. Let them make the call. But command hadn't made the call. When Holloway reported the enemy movement, Captain Morrison had acknowledged the intelligence and ordered them to continue their withdrawal. 3rd Platoon would be warned via radio. If they couldn't be reached, that was unfortunate, but not a reason to risk additional personnel. Elena remembered the exact moment when she had made her decision. They had been 1,200 meters from Rally Point Kilo, close enough to see the vehicle staging area through the trees. Holloway had been moving ahead, his back to her, when Elena stopped walking. Sergeant. Holloway turned, his expression questioning. I'm not going to the rally point. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Holloway's face went through several transformations. Confusion, understanding, anger, and finally something that might have been respect. Corporal, I am ordering you to continue to withdraw. That is a direct order. I understand, Sergeant, and I'm refusing that order. You can report me when you reach the rally point, but I'm not leaving those people die in an ambush I can prevent. Holloway took 3 steps toward her, his face hard as stone. Do you understand what you're doing? This isn't a movie, Voss. This isn't some hero moment where you save the day and everyone claps. You're talking about court-martial, dishonorable discharge, prison time, everything you've worked for, everything you built, gone. And for what? 14 people who might already be dead. For 14 people who might still be alive, Elena replied. Her voice was steady, calmer than she felt. For 14 families who won't have to receive that knock on their door. For the same reason you try to argue with Captain Morrison. Because it's the right thing to do. The right thing and the smart thing aren't always the same. I know, but I'm not smart enough to live with leaving them behind. Are you? The question struck Holloway like a physical blow. Elena watched the struggle play out across his face. Duty versus honor. Orders versus conscience. The lessons he had taught are now being used against him. You have 17 rounds, Holloway said finally, his voice rough, against a platoon-sized element in prepared positions. You'll be operating alone in sub-zero temperatures, with no extraction plan and no support. The tactical odds are impossible. I know. They'll kill you, Voss. Even if you succeed, even if you break their ambush, they'll hunt you down. You can't fight your way out of this. Elena unslung her rifle case and began setting up for movement. Maybe not, but I can buy those people enough time to reach the rally point. And maybe that's enough. Holloway stood motionless for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached into his pack and withdrew 2 additional magazines of .50 BMG ammunition. 20 rounds. He held them out to her. You never saw me, he said quietly. I never saw you. When I reach the rally point, I'll report that we got separated in the storm. That'll buy you maybe 4 hours before they start asking questions. Elena took the ammunition, securing it in her pack. Thank you, Sergeant. Don't thank me. I'm probably signing your death warrant. Holloway turned to leave, then paused. Voss, your father would be proud. Before Elena could respond, he was gone, moving through the trees toward the rally point without looking back. Elena checked her watch. 0812, based on 3rd Platoon's last known position and the enemy's movement pattern. She estimated she had approximately 4 hours to get into position before the ambush was triggered. 4 hours to cover 2 kilometers of frozen terrain, identify the enemy positions, and find a suitable firing position that would give her the angle she needed to engage multiple targets at extreme range. She began moving. The terrain was brutal. frozen streams that had to be crossed on unstable ice, rocky outcroppings that offered no handholds for her numbed fingers, snow drifts that reached her waist in some places, forcing her to expend precious energy breaking trail. Every step was a calculation of risk versus reward, every decision potentially fatal. Elena fell into the methodical mindset that years of sniper training had instilled. One foot in front of the other. Control your breathing. Monitor your core temperature. Stay hydrated. Don't think about the big picture. Focus on the next 100 meters, the next obstacle, the next decision. The Macmillan TAC, 50 across her back, weighed 14.5 kilograms with the scope and bipod attached. Add the ammunition, survival gear, and cold weather equipment, and Elena was carrying nearly 35 kilograms of equipment through some of the most demanding terrain on Earth. Her legs burned. Her lungs ached with every breath of frozen air. But she kept moving, because stopping meant dying, and die meant those 14 soldiers would walk into a kill zone with no one to watch over them. At 10:30, she reached the ridgeline overlooking Checkpoint Bravo. The observation post had been abandoned during the withdrawal, its sandbag positions now partially buried under snow drifts. Elena scanned the terrain below, mentally reconstructing the tactical situation from fragments of intelligence she had gathered. The crossing point was exactly where she expected it, a natural choke point where the valley narrowed between two steep ridgelines. Anyone moving through that sector would be channeled into a killing field no more than 200 meters wide. The ambush positions would be on a northern ridge, where the elevation provided clear field of fire and the rock formations offered natural cover and concealment. Elena pulled out her spotting scope and began a systematic scan of the northern ridge. At first, she saw nothing. The enemy had done an excellent job of concealing their positions. But then she noticed small details that didn't belong. A slight discoloration in the snow where a fighting position had been dug. The glint of metal that could only be a weapon barrel. The heat signature, barely visible through thermal optics, of a human body lying prone behind a rock formation. She counted the positions methodically. 2 PKM machine gun emplacements, placed to create overlapping fields of fire across the crossing point. 4 rifle positions spread along the ridge, providing supporting fire and security. 3 additional personnel in a command position approximately 50 meters behind the main ambush line, probably officers or NCOs coordinating the operation. 9 targets, 760 meters to the nearest position. 1 sniper with 37 rounds. Elena began planning her engagement sequence. The mathematics of precision shooting at extreme range are unforgiving. Every variable matters. Temperature, altitude, wind speed and direction, humidity, the Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation, the spin drift caused by the bullet's rotation. At 760 meters, a .50 BMG round would take approximately 1.2 seconds to reach its target, an eternity in which the wind could push the bullet centimeters off course. The target could shift position. Anything could go wrong. Elena pulled out her Kestrel weather station and began taking readings. Temperature, -18 Celsius. Altitude, 2,340 meters above sea level. Wind, variable, gusting to 15 kilometers per hour from the northwest. Humidity, 32%. She entered the data into her ballistic calculator, watching as the device computed her firing solution. For the first target, the PKM gun on the left, she would need to hold 2.4 mils high and 0.8 mils right to compensate for bullet drop and wind drift. The second target, the PKM gun on the right, would require a slightly different solution due to the increased distance of approximately 810 meters. She would have to shoot them both within 3 seconds of each other. Any longer, and the element of surprise would be lost. The supporting riflemen would scatter, finding better cover, making subsequent shots exponentially more difficult. The entire engagement would depend on those first 2 shots, 2 pulls of the trigger that would determine whether 14 soldiers lived or died. Elena found her position on a rocky outcropping that provided a clear line of sight to both machine gun positions. She deployed her rifle, extending the bipod and adjusting the height until the scope alignment was perfect. She settled into her shooting position, letting her body mold itself to the frozen ground, distributing her weight evenly to minimize movement and maximize stability. Then she waited. The cold was insidious. It crept into her extremities first, fingers and toes going numb despite the specialized cold weather gear. Then it moved inward, settling into her core, making her muscles stiff and her reactions sluggish. Elena performed isometric exercises to generate heat, tensing and releasing muscle groups in sequence, but she knew she was fighting a losing battle. The longer she waited, the less effective she would become. At 11:45, she saw a movement in the valley below. 3rd Platoon had emerged from a tree line, moving in a tactical column toward the crossing point. They were still too far away to trigger the ambush, approximately 900 meters from the kill zone, but they were committed now. There was no other route to the rally point. They would have to come through that choke point. Elena watched them move, recognizing the exhaustion in their movements even at this distance. They had been fighting and marching for over 30 hours. Their ammunition was probably depleted. Their cold weather gear was probably insufficient. They were doing everything right, maintaining tactical spacing, scanning for threats, but they had no idea what was waiting for them. She turned her attention back to the ambush positions. The enemy's soldiers were disciplined, maintaining their concealment despite the cold. She could see the lead PKM gunner through her scope, a young man, probably early 20s, with a face that showed no emotion. He was focused on the valley below, waiting for his targets to enter the kill zone. Elena made her final calculations. She adjusted her scope, dialing in precise elevation and windage settings that her ballistic calculator had provided. She checked her breathing, slowing into methodical rhythm that years of training had made automatic. She visualized the shot, the trigger press, the recoil, the bullet's trajectory, the impact. At 11:58, 3rd Platoon was 500 meters from the crossing point. Elena could see the enemy gunners tensing, their fingers moving toward their triggers. The ambush was about to be sprung. She placed her crosshairs on the chest of the left PKM gunner. Center mass. Maximum probability of incapacitation. She exhaled slowly, letting half the air leave her lungs, reaching that moment of perfect stillness between heartbeats. Her finger touched the trigger. Not pulling, touching, applying pressure in millimeter increments, so gradually that the shot would surprise her when it broke. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The massive .50 caliber round left the barrel at 853 meters per second, spiraling to the frozen air toward a target that couldn't see it coming. 1.2 seconds later, the left PKM gunner's chest exploded. Elena was already shifting, her muscle memory taking over while her conscious mind processed what had just happened. The bolt cycled, a fresh round chambered. Her crosshairs found a second PKM gunner, who was just beginning to react to his partner's death. She fired again. The second gunner went down before he could touch his weapon. 2 shots, 2 kills. 2.8 seconds elapsed. The ambush was broken before it had even begun. But Elena wasn't finished. The supporting riflemen scattered exactly as she had predicted. 3 of them dug behind rock formations, seeking cover from the sniper fire that they couldn't locate. 2 others began moving toward the rear, attempting to flank around her position. The command element, 3 figures huddled behind a snow-covered boulder, began shouting orders that Elena couldn't hear but could interpret through their body language. She worked methodically through her target list. The first rifleman made the mistake of exposing his head above his cover, trying to identify the source of the sniper fire. Elena's round caught him in the upper torso, spinning him backward into the snow. The second rifleman was smarter. He stayed low, crawling toward a better position, but his thermal signature betrayed him through Elena's scope. She led the target slightly, compensating for his movement, and fired. The bullet struck him in the lower back. Not an instant kill, but he wouldn't be fighting anymore. 4 targets down, 5 remaining. 3rd Platoon was now 300 meters from the crossing point, frozen in place by the sudden eruption of gunfire above them. Elena saw a soldier, probably platoon leader, pointing toward the ridgeline where the ambush had been, then pointing toward an alternate route that would take them around the kill zone. Good. They were adapting. They were going to survive. But the remaining enemy soldiers weren't going to let that happen. The 2 flanking riflemen had reached positions from which they could engage 3rd Platoon directly. Elena saw them setting up, deploying their weapons toward the valley below. She shifted her aim, ignoring the command element for now. The flankers were the immediate threat. If they opened fire on 3rd Platoon, people would die before Elena could stop them. The first flanker was at 890 meters, near the extreme effective range of her weapon system in these conditions. She made the calculations in her head, adjusting her aim point to compensate for the increased distance. The wind had shifted, now coming from the east instead of the northwest. She added an additional half-mil of windage correction. Her shot went low, striking the rock formation 3 centimeters below her target. The flanker flinched but didn't go down. He began scanning for her position, his weapon searching for a target. Elena cycled the bolt and fired again. This time, the round found its mark. The second flanker saw his partner die and made a decision that would cost him his life. Instead of seeking cover, he stood and began running toward the rear, exposing his entire body in his panic to escape. Elena dropped him with a single shot at 920 meters, the longest shot she had ever made under combat conditions. 6 targets down, 3 remaining, the command element. They had finally identified her position, and now they were calling for reinforcements on their radio. Elena could see the antenna waving as one of them transmitted, could see the others pointing toward her rocky outcropping. She had maybe 10 minutes before additional enemy forces arrived. Maybe less. Elena took aim at the radio man first, cut the communications, isolate the battlefield. Her round caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him into the snow. The radio fell from his hands, its transmission interrupted. The 2 remaining soldiers, probably officers, made a break for the rear. They ran in a zigzag pattern, using the terrain to mask their movement, disappearing behind ridgelines and reappearing in unpredictable locations. Elena tracked them through her scope, waiting for a clear shot. The first officer made a mistake at 720 meters, pausing to catch his breath behind an inadequate piece of cover. Elena placed her crosshairs on his exposed side and fired. The last remaining enemy soldier, a major, judging by the insignia visible through Elena's scope, reached the tree line and vanished from sight. She could have pursued him, but that would have meant abandoning her position, and 3rd Platoon was still in the valley below. She couldn't protect them if she went hunting. Elena checked her ammunition. 13 rounds remaining from the original 37. She had fired 24 shots and scored 21 hits, an exceptional performance under the circumstances. But the numbers told a harsh truth. She was running low, and the fight wasn't over. Below, 3rd Platoon had reached the crossing point. They were moving quickly now, taking advantage of the suppressed ambush to transit the kill zone. Elena watched them go, counting heads as they passed. 14 soldiers, all accounted for, all moving under their own power. They had made it, but they weren't safe yet. Elena heard the distinctive sound of engines approaching from the northeast. Vehicle engines, heavy ones. She scanned the road that wound through the valley, searching for the source. 2 BTR, 80 armored personnel carriers appeared around the bend, their 8-wheel frames churning through the snow. Each one carried a crew of 3, plus a squad of infantry. 20 soldiers, plus the vehicle's 14.5 millimeters KPV heavy machine guns. Reinforcements called by the radio man before Elena had silenced him. 3rd Platoon was exposed in the crossing point, visible to anyone with a scope or binoculars. The BTRs would spot them within 60 seconds. And once those heavy machine guns opened fire, the slaughter would begin. Elena did the math. Her .50 BMG rounds could penetrate the BTR-80's armor, but only at specific angles and ranges. The vehicles were currently at 1,400 meters, too far for reliable penetration shots. She needed them to get closer. She needed them to present their vulnerable sides rather than their heavily armored fronts. She also needed 3rd Platoon to find cover before the shooting started. Elena made a decision. She shifted her aim to the lead BTR's front tire, a shot that wouldn't penetrate the vehicle but would definitely get their attention. She fired. The round struck the reinforced rubber, blowing out the tire and causing the BTR to swerve violently. The driver corrected, bringing the vehicle back under control, but the damage was done. Both BTRs stopped, their turrets swiveling to search for the source of the fire. Elena had just made herself the primary target. The KPV machine guns opened up on her position, sending streams of 14.5 millimeters rounds tearing into the rocky outcropping. Elena pressed herself flat against the ground as bullets shattered the rocks around her, sending stone fragments spraying in all directions. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar of automatic fire that seemed to shake the mountain itself. She rolled to her right, scrambling behind a larger boulder as the fire tracked her movement. Through the chaos, she could see 3rd Platoon taking advantage of the distraction, moving rapidly toward cover in the tree line. They understood what was happening. Someone was drawing fire to save their lives. The BTRs began advancing again, their remaining tires churning through the snow as they closed the distance. The gunners maintained suppressive fire, keeping Elena pinned while the vehicles maneuvered for a better angle. At this rate, they would be within effective engagement range in less than 90 seconds. Elena checked her rifle. 12 rounds remaining. She would need at least 4 to disable both vehicles, 2 for each BTR's engine compartment or fuel tanks. That left 8 rounds to deal with the infantry that would dismount once the vehicles stopped. The mathematics were against her, but mathematics didn't account for everything. She timed the firing cycles of the KPV gunners, noting the brief pauses when they had to let their weapons cool or reload. During one of these pauses, she popped up from behind her boulder and fired a snapshot at the lead BTR's turret. The round struck the optical sight, shattering the glass and temporarily blinding the gunner. Elena dropped back into cover as the fire resumed, but now it was less accurate. One gunner was firing blind, spraying rounds across the ridgeline without a clear target. The BTRs continued their advance. 800 meters, 700, 650. At 600 meters, Elena had her angle. The vehicles had shifted to avoid a deep snowdrift, presenting their sides rather than their fronts. She could see the engine compartments now, the vulnerable points where her .50 caliber rounds could do real damage. She waited for the firing pause. When it came, she rose smoothly, settling into her stance with the unconscious precision of thousands of hours of training. Her crosshairs found the lead BTR's engine compartment. She fired. The round punched through the armor plate and struck something vital. The BTR lurched, smoke beginning to pour from its engine. The crew bailed out, infantry spilling from the rear hatch and scrambling for cover. Elena shifted to the second BTR. The gunner had spotted her, swinging the KPV toward her position. She had maybe 2 seconds before he opened fire. She pulled the trigger. The second BTR's engine exploded in a spectacular fireball as a round ignited the fuel line. The vehicle ground to a halt, flames licking from its engine compartment. The crew and infantry dismounted in chaos, some of them burning, all of them panicking. 2 vehicles destroyed. 20 enemy soldiers now on foot, scattered across the terrain, seeking cover from the sniper who had just killed their transport. Elena had 9 rounds remaining. She began working through the infantry methodically, prioritizing targets based on their threat level. The soldiers carrying PKMs went first, heavy weapons that could pin her down and overwhelm her position through sheer volume of fire. Then the soldiers with RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades that could bring down her rocky cover entirely. 8 rounds. 7. 6. The enemy began to adapt. Instead of seeking conventional cover, they started moving in pairs, using fire and maneuver tactics to close the distance to Elena's position. One soldier would provide suppressive fire while his partner advanced 20 meters. Then they would switch roles. It was textbook infantry doctrine, and it was working. 5 rounds. 4. Elena knew she couldn't hold this position much longer. The enemy was getting too close, and she was running out of ammunition. She needed to break contact to create distance between herself and the pursuing soldiers. But that would mean abandoning the high ground, giving up the advantage that had allowed her to fight effectively against superior numbers. She looked toward the tree line where 3rd Platoon had disappeared. They were safe now, out of the kill zone, moving toward the rally point. Her mission was complete. The 14 soldiers would make it home. Now she just had to survive long enough to do the same. Elena fired her last shot at a soldier who had gotten within 400 meters of her position. The round caught him in the chest, dropping him instantly. Then she grabbed her rifle and ran. The retreat was controlled chaos. Elena moved from cover to cover, using the terrain to mask her movement while the remaining enemy soldiers pursued. She could hear them behind her, shouting, firing sporadic bursts, trying to track her through the snow and rocks. The blizzard chose that moment to return. The wind picked up suddenly, driving snow horizontally across the mountain face. Visibility dropped to less than 10 meters within minutes. Elena pulled her balaclava up over her face and kept moving, navigating by memory and instinct toward the extraction route she had mentally planned before the engagement. The cold was becoming dangerous now. Her core temperature had dropped during the hours of lying still in her firing position, and the exertion of the retreat was depleting her remaining energy reserves. She could feel hypothermia's first symptoms, the confusion, the sluggishness, the overwhelming urge to stop and rest. But stopping meant dying, and dying meant breaking her promise. Elena thought about her daughter. 6 years old, brown eyes, the same stubborn set to her jaw that Elena saw in the mirror every morning. She thought about the bedtime story she still needed to tell, the scraped knees she still needed to bandage, the graduations and weddings and grandchildren she needed to see. She kept moving. The pursuing soldiers lost her trail in the blizzard. Elena could no longer hear their shouts or gunfire. The storm had swallowed everything in a white void of snow and wind. She stumbled forward, her rifle now serving as a walking stick, her legs moving through pure muscle memory rather than conscious decision. At some point, she fell. She didn't remember falling, but suddenly she was face down in the snow, the cold seeping into her chest and stomach. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't respond properly. They felt like they belonged to someone else, distant, unconnected to her brain's commands. Get up. The voice in her head was her father's. Staff Sergeant Marcus Voss, who had survived 3 deployments to Afghanistan before a roadside bomb had ended his war. He had taught her to shoot when she was 12, setting up targets in the woods behind their house, and making her practice until her groupings were tight enough to fit inside a quarter. He had told her stories about his missions, about the men and women he had served with, about the things a soldier could accomplish when failure wasn't an option. He had taught her that giving up was a choice, and choices had consequences. Elena pushed. Her arms screamed in protest, but they obeyed. She got to her knees, then to her feet, swaying in the wind like a tree about to topple. She kept moving. The blizzard raged for 3 hours. Elena lost all sense of time and direction, navigating entirely by her compass and the terrain features she could identify through the white void. Several times, she nearly walked off cliff edges or into frozen streams. Each time, some instinct pulled her back at the last moment, guiding her away from danger through senses she didn't know she possessed. At 18:30, the storm began to subside. Visibility improved enough for Elena to get her bearings, and she discovered that she had somehow managed to stay roughly on course despite the chaos of the blizzard. Rally Point Kilo was approximately 4 kilometers to the west, across a valley that was now buried under fresh snow. 4 kilometers. Normally, she could cover that distance in less than an hour. In her current state, it might as well be 40, but she started walking anyway. The sun set at 19:15, plunging the mountain into a darkness relieved only by the pale glow of starlight reflected off the snow. Elena switched to her night vision optics, watching the world transform into shades of green and black. The cold deepened, temperatures dropping toward -25°C as the night progressed. She stopped twice to perform hypothermia prevention protocols, forced movement, hot water from her thermos, chemical heat packs applied to her core and extremities. Both times, the urge to simply lie down and rest was almost overwhelming. Both times, she forced herself to keep going. At 22:30, she reached the final ridgeline overlooking Rally Point Kilo. Below, she could see the lights of the Rally Point, vehicle headlights, generator-powered work lights, the glow of heated tents. She could see soldiers moving between vehicles, could see the steam rising from the mess tent where hot food was being served. She had made it. Elena began her descent, her legs trembling with exhaustion, her rifle still clutched in hands that had long since lost feeling. The slope was treacherous, frozen scree covered by fresh snow, and twice she lost her footing and slid several meters before catching herself. But she kept going, drawn toward those lights like a moth to flame. A perimeter guard spotted her at 200 meters. She saw him raise his weapon, heard his challenge through the frozen air. "Halt! Identify yourself." Elena tried to speak, but her voice came out as a croak. She tried again, forcing the words past lips that had gone numb hours ago. "Corporal Elena Voss, Sniper Team 2, I'm coming in." The guard lowered his weapon and began running toward her. Other soldiers followed, their shouts alerting the rest of the camp. Elena watched them come, Watched their faces transform from suspicion to concern to something that might have been awe. She took 3 more steps toward them before her legs finally gave out. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. Voices shouted for medics, for blankets, for warm fluids. Elena felt herself being lifted, carried toward the heated tent that had seemed so impossibly far away just moments before. She was alive. She had kept her promise. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of medical treatment and debriefing. Elena was diagnosed with moderate hypothermia, frostbite on 3 fingers and both ears, and severe exhaustion. The battalion medics wrapped her in warming blankets, started 4 fluids, and monitored her core temperature as it slowly climbed back to normal ranges. Captain Morrison appeared at her bedside 18 hours after her arrival. His face was a mass of conflicting emotions, anger at her disobedience, relief at her survival, and something else that Elena couldn't quite identify. Corporal Voss, you deliberately disobeyed a direct order to withdraw. Yes, sir. You remained in AO without authorization, engaged enemy forces without support, and put yourself at extreme risk. Yes, sir. Morrison stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he sat down in a chair beside her bed. 3rd platoon made it to the rally point 6 hours after you did. 14 soldiers, all accounted for. They reported coming under fire from an ambush position on the northern ridge, then watching that ambush get systematically dismantled by sniper fire from an unknown source. They said someone saved their lives. Elena said nothing. Sergeant Holloway gave a statement that you became separated from him during the blizzard. He claimed he didn't know where you went or what you did during those hours. Do you want to change that account? No, sir. Morrison nodded slowly. The official record will reflect that 3rd platoon survived through luck and their own skill. There will be no mention of a lone sniper engaging enemy forces in violation of direct orders. There will be no investigation, no disciplinary action, no recognition of any kind. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Good. Morrison stood, his expression unreadable. For what it's worth, Corporal, I would have made the same decision you did, but I couldn't order it. I couldn't put 1 soldier at risk to save 14. That's not how command works. That's not how the math works. I understand, sir. No, you don't, and I hope you never have to. Morrison turned toward the tent flap, then paused. Your father will be proud. Voss. Dismissed. Elena watched him go, then closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her into sleep. 3 days later, she stood at the edge of the rally point, watching as 3rd platoon formed up for their official commendation ceremony. The battalion commander had come forward to personally award them the Combat Infantry Badge for their actions during the withdrawal. There would be medals, commendations, letters of appreciation. Their names would go into the official record as soldiers who had survived an impossible situation through courage and skill. Elena stood at the back of the crowd, anonymous in her standard cold weather gear. None of the 3rd platoon soldiers knew her face. None of them would ever know who had killed the ambush that would have ended their lives. And that was exactly how it should be. Sergeant First Class Holloway appeared beside her, his breath steaming in the cold air. You should be up there with them. No, Sergeant, I shouldn't. Holloway studied her profile. Most people would want the recognition, would want the medal, the commendation, the acknowledgement of what they did. Most people didn't do what I did, Sergeant. I disobeyed orders. I put myself at risk against direct instructions from my commanding officer. If I got recognition for that, what message would it send? That soldiers can ignore orders whenever they think they know better? Sometimes soldiers do know better. Elena turned to look at him, and sometimes they don't. The system exists for a reason. The chain of command exists for a reason. I broke that system, Sergeant. I got lucky, the outcome was good, and no one else got hurt. But it could have gone differently. I could have died in that blizzard. And then what? Another memorial service. Another folded flag. Another family destroyed by someone who thought they could be a hero. Holloway was silent for a long moment. Then why did you do it? Elena turned back to watch 3rd platoon receive their commendations. 14 soldiers standing at attention, their faces proud and exhausted and grateful to be alive. 14 families who would receive phone calls instead of death notifications. 14 futures that would continue because she had refused to walk away. Because some things matter more than recognition, Sergeant. Some things matter more than rules. Some things matter more than being smart. She paused. And because my daughter needs to know that doing the right thing isn't about getting credit. It's about being able to look at yourself in the mirror and know that when it mattered, you didn't look away. Holloway nodded slowly. You're a hell of a soldier, Voss. I'm a mother, Sergeant. Everything else is secondary. The extraction convoy departed Rally Point Kilo at 0600 the following morning. Elena rode in the back of an M939 cargo truck, her rifle secure in its case beside her, her eyes fixed on the frozen landscape rolling past. The other soldiers in the truck talked quietly among themselves, sharing stories of the withdrawal, discussing rumors of their next deployment, speculating about when they would finally go home. Elena didn't participate in the conversations. She sat apart, wrapped in her own silence, processing the events of the past week. The faces of the men she had killed kept appearing in her mind. The young PKM gunner who had been the first to die, the officers who had fled toward the tree line, the infantry soldiers she had picked off one by one as they pursued her. She didn't feel guilty. She had made a decision, and that decision had consequences for everyone involved, including the enemy soldiers who had been preparing to murder 14 of her fellow soldiers. War was about consequences. Every trigger pull was a choice, and every choice had weight. But she didn't feel triumph, either. There was no celebration in her heart, no sense of heroic accomplishment. She felt tired, bone deep, soul-crushing tired. The kind of tired that wouldn't be cured by sleep or rest, but only by time and distance from the things she had done. The convoy reached the forward operating base at 14:30. Elena collected her gear and made her way to the communication center, where she was finally able to place a satellite phone call to her daughter. The phone rang 3 times before a small voice answered. Hello? Hey, baby girl. It's Mommy. Mommy. The joy in that single word was worth everything Elena had endured. Mommy, are you coming home? Grandma says you're coming home soon. Soon, baby. Very soon. Mommy just has a few more things to do, and then I'll be on a plane headed straight to you. I made you a picture, Mommy. It's you and me and Luna at the beach. Remember when we went to the beach? Elena's throat tightened. I remember, sweetheart. That was a good day, wasn't it? The best day. I want to go back when you come home. Can we go back? Absolutely, baby. The first thing we'll do when Mommy gets home is go to the beach. You and me and Luna. Promise? I promise. They talked for 10 more minutes. About school, about friends, about the cat that had somehow learned to open a refrigerator. Elena listened to every word, storing them away like treasures, letting her daughter's voice wash away the cold and the fear and the death that had consumed her world for the past week. When she finally hung up, she sat in the communications center for a long time, just breathing, just existing, just being alive. Sergeant Holloway found her there an hour later. Transport to Ramstein leaves in 2 hours. You're manifested on it. From there, you'll catch a flight to Dover, then home. Elena looked up at him. Thank you, Sergeant. Don't thank me. Thank whoever decided your paperwork needed to get processed ahead of schedule. Holloway's expression was neutral, but there was a glint in his eye that suggested he knew exactly who had expedited that paperwork. Sergeant, yeah. Will I ever see you again? After this deployment? Holloway shrugged. Military's a small world. Voss. We always end up crossing paths with the people who matter. Besides, I'm transferring to the sniper school at Fort Benning next year. Might need some guest instructors. Elena smiled, the first real smile she'd managed in days. I might know someone who's available. I thought you might. Holloway extended his hand. Take care of yourself, Corporal, and take care of that little girl. She's lucky to have a mother like you. Elena shook his hand. She's the reason I keep going, Sergeant. Everything else is just details. Holloway nodded once, then turned and walked away without looking back. 2 hours later, Elena was on AC-17 Globemaster III, flying west toward home. She sat in the red nylon seat with her eyes closed, feeling the vibration of the engines through her body, listening to the steady hum of machinery that was carrying her away from the frozen mountains and the impossible choices and the faces of the dead. She thought about 3rd Platoon, probably still at the rally point, receiving their commendations and telling stories about their survival. She wondered if any of them would ever know the truth. She wondered if it mattered. No, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were alive. What mattered was that 14 families would receive phone calls instead of visits from casualty notification officers. What mattered was that she had done her duty, not the duty assigned to her by command, but the duty she had assigned to herself. The plane landed at Dover Air Force Base 18 hours later. Elena gathered her gear and walked down the ramp into the gray Delaware morning, feeling the relatively warm air against her face. 38 degrees Fahrenheit. After -20 in the mountains, it felt like summer. A young specialist from the base transportation office met her at the bottom of the ramp. Corporal Voss, I'm your escort to the terminal. Your connecting flight to civilian airport departs in 4 hours. Do you need anything? Food? Coffee. Coffee would be good. Thank you. No problem, Corporal. This way. Elena followed the specialist across the tarmac, her boots echoing on the concrete. Around her, the machinery of the Air Force continued its endless cycle. Aircraft taxiing, cargo being loaded, personnel moving between buildings. It was all so normal, so routine, as if the world hadn't changed at all while she was away. And maybe it hadn't. Maybe the world just kept turning regardless of what individuals did or didn't do. Maybe her actions on that frozen ridge were just a tiny ripple in an ocean of human history, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But ripples mattered to the people they touched. 14 soldiers would go home to their families because of what she had done. That wasn't nothing. That was everything. The coffee was terrible, standard military quality, but Elena drank it anyway, letting the warmth spread through her body. She sat in the departure lounge with her rifle case beside her, watching soldiers and airmen come and go, each one carrying their own burdens, their own stories, their own impossible choices. At 1400, her flight was called. Elena gathered her gear and made her way to the gate, passing through security checkpoints and boarding procedures with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this dozens of times before. The commercial flight was quiet. Most of the passengers were military personnel heading home on leave, their uniforms exchanged for civilian clothes, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. Elena took a window seat and stared out at the clouds passing below, her mind finally beginning to quiet. 3 hours later, the plane touched down at her home airport. Elena gathered her gear one last time and made her way through the terminal, her heart beginning to beat faster as she approached the arrivals area. She saw them before they saw her. Her mother, standing near the baggage claim, holding the hand of a little girl in a bright pink jacket. The girl was bouncing on her heels, her brown eyes scanning the crowd, searching for a face she hadn't seen in 6 months. Their eyes met. Mommy! The little girl broke free from her grandmother's hand and ran. Elena dropped her bags and knelt just in time to catch her daughter in a crushing embrace, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with the release of emotions she had held inside for so long. I missed you, baby. I missed you so much. I missed you too, Mommy. I made you pictures. So many pictures. I can't wait to see them all. Elena's mother approached, her own eyes glistening. Welcome home, sweetheart. Thanks, Mom. They walked out of the airport together. 3 generations of women, bound by blood and love and the unbreakable bonds that survived distance and danger and everything else the world threw at them. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. And for the first time in weeks, Elena felt something that had been absent from her life since she'd shipped out. She felt peace. That night, after her daughter was asleep and her mother had gone home, Elena sat on her back porch with a cup of tea, staring up at the stars. The same stars that had watched over her on that frozen ridge. The same stars that had guided her through the blizzard. The same stars that had been shining since long before humanity existed and would continue shining long after they were gone. She thought about duty. Not the duty that came from orders and regulations and the chain of command, but the deeper duty that came from being human. The duty to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The duty to make impossible choices when no one else would. The duty to do the right thing even when no one was watching. She thought about the 3rd platoon soldiers who would never know her name. She thought about the enemy's soldiers she had killed. Men who had families of their own, who had been following their own orders, who had died in a war they probably didn't fully understand. She thought about Sergeant Holloway, who had given her ammunition and covered her tracks and never asked for anything in return. She thought about her father, who who had given his life in service to something larger than himself, and who had taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And she thought about her daughter, asleep in the next room, who would grow up knowing that her mother had been a soldier. Not a hero. Elena didn't believe in heroes, but a soldier. Someone who had done her duty. Someone who had made impossible choices. Someone who had come home. Elena's story shows us that true duty isn't about following orders or seeking recognition. It's about doing what's right when no one is watching. If this kept you engaged, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments, would you have made the same choice Elena did, knowing you'd never receive credit? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories like this are coming. See you in the next one. The stars continue their slow rotation overhead, indifferent to the wars and struggles of the tiny world below. But on that porch, in that moment, one soldier found something that had eluded her for months. She found peace with her choices, and she kept her promise.